All right, it is 10:01 Eastern North America time, so I think it's time to kick this thing off. Good morning. Welcome from wherever you're watching this in the world from. This is, of course, our release webinar for HAPI 6.4.0 and Smile CDR 2023.0.2. This release has the codename Wizard, so this morning we will be talking all about the Wizard release. Cannot believe we're at W already. As always, we're going to be going through everything that is new, everything we've been working on in the last quarter in the HAPI product, in the Smile CDR product. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in our other product families as well. And we'll be doing a Q&A as usual, with a little bit of a fun change this time around. I have the last few I've been joined by Ken Stevens, our director of core product development. This time around, I am going to be joined by Bryn Rhodes, who is our director of standards around here. Bryn, of course, many people know Bryn. He is very famous in the standards world, well known for his instrumental work in developing the CQL standard and the reasoning technologies we all know and love. So good chance to ask Bryn some questions about what he thinks about that. And there we go. So this is our 23rd named release. I think I say this every time. I cannot believe we've had that many of them. We're almost at the end of the alphabet. I don't know that we've actually picked a word yet for X, and fewer words there. So I don't know. Is it going to be X-ray, xylophone? Who knows? Those are the only two I can think of. We will see. We usually kick this off with a few fun facts about whatever word we've chosen. Quick bit of research on the internet reveals that any lists you can find of fun facts about Wizard are actually lists of annoying facts about Wizard. So it's hard to come up with any content for this slide here, I have to say. I did learn that Wizard, I mean, I guess this is no surprise. The word wizard comes from an Old English word meaning wise man, which makes sense. We sure learned a whole heck of a lot about the making of the word, or the making of the movie The Wizard of Oz, because there's lots of facts about that get into nitty gritty detail. It turns out that there's only ever been one Academy Award winner with the word wizard in it, and it was not the 1989 Fred Savage hit The Wizard, which I think that was a rob, because man, what a great movie that was. Who knows? I'm sure lots of people disagree with that. As usual, we've developed a playlist. If you've ever thought to yourself, I love this open source project. I wonder what music the developers of that project are into. Well, I think for most software packages out there in the world, you have no way of answering that question. But for ours, you do. So if you're curious what our team are into this month, check out the release playlist. I have to say, it's a really heavy playlist this time around. I don't know if everyone's getting sick of winter or in an angry mood. I'm not sure what's going on with our team developers, but there's a lot of really heavy music in this playlist. It's a good playlist, though. Highly recommended checking that out. Before we get into the actual meat of what's new, I drew up a little chart this morning, just counting the changelog entries across HAPI and Smile, just to see what how we're trending in terms of overall number of changes. I mean, as you can see, we are trending upwards for sure. I think it's really fun to look at a little bump in 2021. That, of course, corresponds with the payer go lives that happened in the US around that time. So I think there was a flurry of features that were developed to support that world, which really caused a little spike then. And of course, overall, big upward trend. I cannot get over the number of changes that are in this release. And particularly, I'm excited this time because we've got a couple of really big ones to talk about. There's some exciting stuff, so I won't give it away yet. We're just about to get there. So what is new in this release? Let's talk about it. The first big one. This is so exciting. I mentioned that this was coming last time around. Our team have been hard at work on a redesign of our web admin console. The web admin console in Smile CDR, of course, is the administrative UI that you use to configure modules, look at the audit trails, manage transactions, turn things on and off, all of that good stuff. The original code base for that was written a long time ago by a couple of software developers who had no business writing front ends, I have to admit, and I was one of them, and I will happily admit I'm not a front end designer, nor should I ever be put in charge of that. Fortunately, we finally got a team in charge of this that actually knew what they were doing. So the redesigned web admin console is glorious, has all the same functionality, but it's a whole lot more pretty to look at, a whole lot more usable. We very much welcome feedback. I think we've gotten some early feedback from customers who have found there are a few things that work differently and have asked us about it. we very much welcome suggestions there. So take this for a spin. Let us know what you think of it. I'm pretty excited by all the changes, and big congratulations to Jason and the team who worked on the admin console. The next big one to talk about. This is probably the thing I'm personally most excited to talk about. A new feature that we are debuting in this release in experimental mode this time around is a feature called Megascale. Megascale is all about the ability to connect a FHIR storage repository to multiple physical databases, or for that matter, multiple logical databases, however whatever your database technology is of choice. The general idea being that any relational database you use is going to have some natural limit to how much data you can store in it. Many of the big self-hosted databases, whether you're installing Postgres locally or Oracle or SQL Server, any of those databases will have natural limitations to how much data you can store. Often when you get to the cloud-hosted databases, which are very popular these days, those limits are even lower. We are, of course, seeing FHIR adoption going fast and furious. Lots of people are building mission-critical, massive FHIR infrastructures to support huge populations of patients. And often the amount of data they're storing just plain exceeds the amount of data that they can put into a single database without really straining that database, or in some cases, just plain without exceeding the amount you physically can get into the database. So Megascale is an attempt to smear that data across multiple databases, entirely managed by the platform. We are super excited to be launching this. We're working with a couple of customers today to get this trialed and deployed out. As I say, we're in experimental phase right now. We're aiming for trial status by May. If you have a use case for massive amounts of data, we would love to hear from you. We would love to work with you to get Megascale working in your environment. More to come on this one, I'm sure. I will talk about it for the next few releases as we continue to bring features out into Megascale, I'm sure. Super exciting stuff. And I'll point out, Megascale itself has a little mascot, an angry raccoon. I'm just in love with that picture. Came from DALL-E 2, incidentally. Next up, MDM. We do continue to invest in MDM. We see this as one of the critical pieces of infrastructure that anyone rolling out large-scale FHIR infrastructure are going to need. I think you'll start to see a theme here as we get to bigger and bigger FHIR infrastructures. People rolling out statewide, countrywide infrastructures to manage large populations of data. You get a whole new class of problems. Scale is one of them. Identity management is another. Master data is a big facet of that, and MDM is a big part of that. The biggest thing that's happened on the MDM front is with performance. We have started adding multi-threaded processing logic into MDM. This is a really critical improvement. We've got plenty more to do. We know that as far as MDM goes, but we do recognize that doing this at large scale does mean a whole new class of performance problems, and we are actively working on those. We've also added some new options to the query links operation that can be used to find your links, and some additional features to our address normalization capabilities. So lots of good stuff going into the MDM product. An interesting one to talk about, and this too is not necessarily related to the scale of data, but a common concern we've heard from customers who are trying to roll out, big secure deployments of FHIR infrastructure. A thing that we've heard a few times are complaints about PHI in our system logs. In other words, identifiable information bleeding into system logs. We have made a massive audit of all of our code in order to prevent that from ever happening. So at this point, there should be no identifying information, no resource bodies, for example, in any of the system logs emitted at info level or above. So what we've done is we've gone through, we've done a big audit, we've dropped any sort of troubleshooting details down to debug level. We've also dropped down the payload in the payload logging in HAPI FHIR's client log interceptor to debug level. So this should help you to ensure that you do not have any PHI in system logs. And of course, the security people are always very happy to hear about that. We do continue to invest, of course, in MongoDB. Every release brings a whole bunch more features to our MongoDB storage engine. We're a big fan of that. We've now got support for unique search parameters in Mongo. That's a thing we've had in the relational world for a while. So the ability to declare that a search parameter, or for that matter, a combo search parameter, cannot have more than one resource with the same value within that search parameter. That's now enforced. We have done a bunch of work to bring the $everything operation up to parity with its relational counterpart. There's a whole bunch of nuance in the way that $everything works. A lot of this has come from systems like the payer-to-payer flows, which do mandate the use of the $everything operation and use it quite heavily. So we've done a bunch of work to bring that into parity. We've also implemented reindex automatically for search parameter changes, and the delete expunge operation, which lots of people when they're testing find very useful because it lets you quickly delete and purge data from your database. Very useful thing. Our first community contribution of this webinar, I'm always happy to talk about those. We've got a bunch of improvements to our automated OpenAPI/Swagger documentation. Swagger, of course, is best known as the Swagger UI tool, but it's an automatic and sort of cross-platform, cross-technology way of documenting APIs. We've had support for OpenAPI for some time. Now that people are really heavily using it in big systems, they are starting to find things that it could do better. We have big thanks to Michael Lawley from CSIRO for all of his work in improving the way that OpenAPI works. If you're interested in what Michael's up to, Michael, of course, is one of the, or I think this is the lead developer with AutoServer, which is absolutely the best FHIR-based terminology server on the planet. So check them out. They use HAPI as a part of their technology mix, and they're a partner of ours, so we use them a lot as well. The real-time export system, which can be used to generate denormalized views of your FHIR data in a more analytics-oriented relational database schema, has continued to see a fair bit of investment. We've added support for a number of new SQL data types in our export. That's one thing we did. And the other thing, which has just merged, did make it under the wire into this release, and I'm very excited to talk about. And I think we will talk a whole lot more about this as we expand it and craft use cases and things like that. Is this new CLI command called generate RTE schema? The gist with this command is, let's say you have got a FHIR repository which implements a FHIR implementation guide. So for example, I've got a database I've populated with Karen Blue Button data. And I've implemented the Karen, I forget the giant long name for it, but let's just call it the Blue Button implementation guide. The generate RTE schema will generate automatically, using the implementation guide, a real-time export configuration and database schema for analytics purposes. So in other words, if you'd like a denormalized view of the data that you've already mapped to whatever implementation guides you were implementing, generate RTE schema will help you get there so that you can do analytics against your data. You could connect it to Tableau or Jaspersoft or whatever your reporting tools are. You can run SQL directly against it if you want. Lots of cool stuff you can do with this new capability. We've had real-time export for a while, but the ability to automatically generate the configurations is, I think, a powerful new feature. We've got a bunch of ideas for what to do with this to continue to expand on this capability. Our transaction log capabilities have seen a bunch of work. For one, we've added the ability to filter out any PHI from the transaction logs. That's effectively stripping out the request and response bodies from that, which is a fairly common request these days. We originally, when we designed the transaction logs, we really thought of them as a non-production tool that would never be used with production data. But we found that a lot of people do like them in production scenarios, but wish that they were a little bit less verbose. So we've made that change. Worth mentioning as well, we have now disabled those payloads in our default configuration and set the default retention on transaction logs for 7 days. All of that can be configured, of course, so if you've got different needs, you can absolutely change those, but our defaults have changed based on what customers have told us are their sensible defaults. The channel import module. Channel import, of course, is used to ingest data. We use Kafka, Apache Kafka streaming to get massive amounts of data in quickly. Channel import is a very popular tool for doing that. The channel import module is now fully partition aware, which means if you've got a partition database, and incidentally, I should mention the megascale technology I spoke about before is actually a specialization of partitioning. So it plays really well with partitioning and requires partitioning. So if you wanted to use channel import with it, you could now do that, which is lots of fun. Some interesting changes to audit logs. And again, I mean, I keep talking about this theme of big scale. This is another change that comes from the world of scalability and large scale FHIR infrastructure deployments. Now that we've had a number of people who've had Smile CDR deployments in production for years now, and we've got a a bunch of customers who, they've been storing data incrementally for 5 years now. And once you've been doing that for a while, of course, if the data system is active, and many of them are, you've got lots and lots of use, and you're generating lots and lots of audit trails. Our audit logs, our internal audit logs, traditionally have been stored in the same database that houses our cluster manager. But we've had a few people say we'd really like that to go to its own dedicated database so that we can scale it differently. We can perhaps use different storage characteristics for it, those types of things. That is now possible. You can now absolutely store your audit log to an external separate database with its own connection details and its own performance characteristics if you'd like. This doesn't do away with the existing functionality, it just gives you another option if you'd like. I should also mention a few people have asked recently, what about the transaction log? Because it has similar challenges. That is on a roadmap for the next release cycle, is to get the transaction log working the exact same way. So stay tuned on that. I'm sure I'll be talking about it in 3 months. Lots has happened in the world of clinical reasoning. Hopefully we'll get Bryn to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but we've done our clinical reasoning team have done all kinds of cool stuff. Certainly the one on this slide that I think excites me the most is we've reached the second beta of the Android FHIR SDK. The Android FHIR SDK is a collaboration between our team, Google, and the World Health Organization, who are developing this amazing sort of Android-based SDK for FHIR storage, parsing, measure evaluation, validation. Lots of capabilities work there, so lots of stuff has happened there. And you will notice the rest of the themes here are all around adding additional operations, adding additional implementation guides, and more scalability testing, because we are pretty obsessed with that these days. Another project I'm really excited to talk about that has just landed, just been added to this code base, is around the International Patient Summary. The IPS, which I think is one of the coolest sort of little IGs that has come out of the FHIR community, I think since the start of FHIR, is this IPS. IPS is a spec for a FHIR document that contains a snapshot of a health record, basically all of the critical things that a provider would want to know about you, the patient. The original aim of this was for it to be used across international borders. If I'm traveling internationally and need a health record I can bring with me, this is a nice little summary of my health record. What's really interesting is we're seeing, IPS remains that remains the name, but increasingly we're seeing interest from people who want to use IPS across all kinds of other borders. At home in Canada, where I live, we're talking about it quite a bit as a mechanism for cross-provincial healthcare, so crossing what are effectively state borders. We're seeing lots of institutions starting to get interested as well for just crossing boundaries between institutions as well, so lots of interest there. What we have added around this time is an automatic experimental API for generating an IPS based on data in your repository. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you've got a repository that contains a shared health record, contains people's allergies and problems and observations and things like that. This IPS generator implements what's called the $summary operation and will automatically pull out resources from your repository and package them up into a document, and will then generate automatically narratives that give you a nice human readable version of all of that. Everything in here is customizable. We've got a default configuration that picks which resources are appropriate based on its own logic, but you can extend it, you can change the logic, you can add sections, you can remove sections. Everything in the entire API is designed to be extensible and extendable and sort of freely usable. So we are really excited about this. We're going to be talking a whole lot more about IPS in the coming months. And we're pretty excited to sort of see how this goes. If you have an interest in IPS, we would love to hear from you. We would love to sort of figure out what are your use cases and see how we can help. This, I should give a shout out here. This is the second feature in this webinar that comes with some really awesome collaboration from the community as well. Big thanks to Rio Benin from Crossroads Lab and Panayotis Sava and Konstantinos Yasemi from the University of Cyprus, who did a whole lot of work to get the initial implementation of this off the ground. We spent a bunch of time at the most recent FHIR Connectathon integrating this into HAPI so that we could start launching it to the community. Our FHIR Gateway has seen a bunch of work in the last 3 months. Most excitingly, we have now got support for write operations through the Gateway. The Gateway, of course, is a facade against multiple FHIR servers. If you have got a complicated environment where you've got multiple FHIR backends, and you'd like to present them to clients as a single unified FHIR backend, then the gateway is for you. We've seen people with very complicated needs do some really neat things with the gateway for quite a while now, but the gateway has always been limited only to read operations. So FHIR read, FHIR search, FHIR history, FHIR everything operation, those types of things. As of this release, we now support updates, creates, and deletes through the gateway as well. So we've now got some nice routable support for writing, and all of the logic for routing that worked on the read side of the house works on the write side of the house as well. So it's quite a neat implementation, actually. I should also mention we have now got support for GraphQL requests through the gateway as well. It only does simple routing, so it's not going to aggregate data from multiple backends yet and generate a unified GraphQL query. But if your backends support GraphQL, and certainly a core Smile engine does, then the gateway can also help you get GraphQL supported. On the HAPI world, we've made a few changes that are specific to HAPI. Most importantly, batch 2 tasks will now automatically retry their failures. That was already the case in Smile CDR, but we realized the retry mechanism didn't actually work in HAPI. So for example, if you were running a reindex and one of your reindex chunks failed because of an intermittent failure or constraint issue or something like that, the system would not pick up and automatically retry. That's now been fixed. Our support for the member match operation just keeps getting better. Member match is a DaVinci specified implementation operation. We will now automatically generate a consent resource if any matches were found. This is a thing that was specified in the IG. And finally, our third and I think final community contribution that I'll talk about. A bunch of APIs in HAPI have been reworked to take out any dependencies in them or any code blobs in them that would prevent them from running successfully on Android. Big thanks, of course, to Vitor Pamplona, who did a whole bunch of work to get this working. Vitor also added a CI check that will automatically test our APIs going forward to make sure that we're not introducing anything that would prevent our structures from working on Android. So if you're developing Android applications, HAPI is the thing for you. And this is actually the second time I've mentioned Android this time around. So as you can see, lots of activity around Android in the HAPI community these days. That's lots of fun. A thing I will point out, if you are a user of HAPI's JPA module, the database module, we realized this was a thing that was reported a while ago, and it took us a while to figure out what was going on. It turns out our migrator was not properly migrating any lob columns. We use a data type called OID in Postgres, and our migrator was not properly migrating those. So if you deployed a fresh empty schema version of HAPI JPA, you had no problems on Postgres, but a couple of columns need to be migrated. So we highly recommend anyone using HAPI JPA to upgrade whenever they can and to run the database migrator, because we will correct the data type of a few columns. Effectively, there is a risk of data loss otherwise in HAPI, so definitely important to do. Oh, and I was wrong. There is one more community contribution to throw out. We've had a lot this quarter. I'm excited about that. A bug was fixed in our value set expansion around the include hierarchy directive. Thank you to a GitHub user for contributing that. We do continue to see lots of excitement around HL7 v2 support. Lots of stuff has happened there. Most importantly, on the v2 world, whenever we are mapping HL7 v2 payloads to FHIR, one of the big parts of that, of course, is mapping terminology, mapping the codes that are generally used in v2 messages to the codes that you have to use or want to use in FHIR. Our module for doing that mapping has traditionally used hard-coded mappings that we enforce. That has now been refactored as a part of a much larger refresh of that code base to use our terminology module. So we will now use concept map resources for that mapping. The system will automatically import those concept maps into your database, but you can customize them as you need. So if you've got your own specialized needs for terminology mapping, you can modify the concept maps that we're using. We've also made a few improvements to multi-line OBX segments, which is a common way of representing multi-line text reports. So some nice little enhancements there. A couple of other small things to do to mention. We have put some work into our member match operation. There was one change in HAPI. There's a different one in Smile. So lots of enhancements there. We have added the device resource to the bulk export that we generate when you're doing patient or group level bulk exports. This is important just because the core definition of bulk export for patient specifies the patient compartment as the parameters for what you will export. The device resource is not in the patient compartment, but a number of other implementation guides expect it to be there. So we have made that change as well. A couple of security updates that I will point out. If you're a Docker user with Smile CDR, we have made a change to our core Docker image so that Smile will now run as a non-root user. We had a few complaints that where you're running inside a Docker container, there is limited damage you can do using a root user, but it's always more secure not to do that. So we have made that change as well. We've also shifted to be running against an Alpine Linux image. Previously, we were running against a Debian image, so that is a small change as well. Both of these have been done to make security scans happier. And we had a few people mention that they were excited that those changes were coming. I will draw your attention to one security advisory that came out of the HAPI project as well. It's got a long name that I'm not going to read out because it's way too many letters and numbers. A big thanks to Jonathan Leacha, who made a disclosure about this about a month ago. This issue has been resolved. I will point out this is actually against the org.hl7.fhir.core library in HAPI. Which is used for its structures in HAPI and for the validator and a few other modules, but not. We sort of don't use its entire API. This security advisory is about a part of the API that we do not expose or use anywhere in HAPI. It specifically is for the writing of implementation guide packages. It's an issue called zip slip. This does affect the implementation guide publisher toolchain, which also uses that library. So if you're a user of the IG publisher toolchain, do make sure you're on the latest version of that because we have patched this issue there. As always, I haven't nearly been able to get through the nearly 300 changes that have gone into this release. We never can. There's just so much in there. So I will recommend you go through the change logs and see everything that's new in these two releases. One thing I will point out, there is one known issue with this current release that we are in the middle of fixing. We sort of realized this too late for the fix to make it into this release. There is an issue with FHIR bulk export, better known as, or perhaps otherwise known as the FHIR bulk data access IG. Oh, I said ID on the slide, that should say IG. There is an issue where occasionally bulk export requests will either time out or not include all of the pages of response that they actually should. So if you are a user of bulk export, we do recommend you hold off upgrading to this release. We will be releasing a patch very shortly. We've got a bunch of work going for a fix to that. So we'll be releasing a point release very shortly with that fix. A quick whirlwind tour of a few of our other products before we wrap this up. On the AppSphere, we do continue to work on AppSphere, which is, of course, the integrated app deployment and management platform that's built into Smile CDR. We've added filters and auditing capabilities for FHIR apps to the admin console. So if you've got lots of apps in your console, that makes that a bit easier. It's now possible to, in an automated way, send emails out to the developers of your apps to have them re-sign any attestations or legal terms that they need to if you want to have their apps in your gallery. We've now got a nice new view for launching practitioner apps from the gallery. So traditionally, AppSphere, or at least the initial use case of AppSphere was all around patient and member, payer member type apps. We've now got the ability for you to launch practitioner provider-based apps as well. And finally, partitioning awareness just continues to creep into all of our products because we know people love partitioning in all of its many forms. AppSphere is now able to deal with partitions as well. On the payer-to-payer, the P2P front, our payer-to-payer product has added the ability to manage payer connections within the admin portal. Previously, you could only do this within our web admin console, but now within the P2P admin portal, you can also do that. So this should improve the experience for anyone who is doing administration of a P2P solution. As you can see, we've got a bunch of upcoming features as well, including WCAG compliance. We've got an audit underway for that. For anyone who is doing multiple lines of business, this is anyone who's using payer-to-payer in a configuration where you've got multiple plans hosted by a single database. We'll be adding support for bulk data, and most importantly, delegation workflows, which is a difficult workflow, but a fun one to work through. And finally, on our paired member portal, the PMP product, we've made a bunch of enhancements to the directory, including gender, specialties, and languages. We've added the ability to print, and we've made a bunch of enhancements to provider search. So all kinds of new stuff happening on the search for providers functionality within the payer member portal. Most importantly, here in the next quarter, we will be adding support for MDM. So you can kind of see a bunch of harmony between all of these products as we sort of figure out how these modules play together. We're seeing lots of customers taking advantage of many of these modules together. So a whole lot that's happening there. Where will we be in the next little while? A couple of events that you will see Smile CDR at. We will be at the IHE Connectathon in March. We will be at HIMSS in April. We would love for you to say hi to us for either of those. We will be at DEMEA in Germany in April. So if you are on the European side of the pond, we'd love to say hello to you at DEMEA. And most importantly, I'm very excited to mention once again, the Smile CDR Intelligent Health Data Symposium is happening in May. This is a live symposium. There is an in-person. There's also a virtual component to it, but we would love to have you come join us in Toronto if you're interested. We're doing this at a place called the TIFF Lightbox, which is a really neat venue in Toronto. I'm pretty excited for that, so we would love to have you. And there we go. This takes us to the end. So I'm going to leave this slide up. If you're interested in checking out our release playlist, there's there's a link to that. Check out the playlist. You can keep up with us on Twitter. My new experiment personally is I'm trying to get myself off of Twitter and onto Mastodon. So I'm pretty new to that platform, but I'd love to see you on Mastodon if you're interested. I just think I like the fact that it's open source. So there we go. Come join me there. And with that, let's open things up. Megan is going to be joining us. Megan Pete, who is she works on our product management team, our UX and product management team here at Smile CDR, and Bryn Rhodes, who is our director of standards within our team, will be joining us. So, hello everyone.
Hello. So while we're talking, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat and we will read them out. We did have a question in the chat back from your international patient summary slide from Samyan asking if IPS is similar to CCDA.
Ooh, fun. Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's talk about this. So CCDA, absolutely. CCDA, first off, is a set of profiles on CDA, the clinical document architecture. CDA, of course, is a general purpose document framework of which FHIR documents would be the FHIR equivalent. CCD defines a number of profiles for a bunch of specific use cases. They've got coordination of care documents, transfer of care documents, a bunch of things like that. The international patient summary could be thought of as being very similar in scope to one of those profiles, slightly different in nature, just because it really is intended to be a comprehensive summary that you would take with you as you travel across borders. And it's really sort of intended to be general purpose. I think what's going to be really interesting to see, truthfully, is how people end up profiling CCDA. There are a number of countries, a number of jurisdictions around the world that are already hard at work profiling CCDA for specific use cases. And I think the real analog to CCD is those sort of use case and jurisdiction specific profiles that are starting to emerge. As they do, I think we'll be able to contrast those to be exactly what CCD has done in the US market.
Cool. And then you had a small follow-up question of, do we have any hints of when we might see this?
Ooh, well, so I mean, the exciting thing is the IPS work did land for this release. It is at experimental status as of now, but it is in the product. So if you are either a HAPI user or a Smile CDR user, you can enable the summary operation. You can play with it. There is a customization API we've documented that is absolutely usable. And I think most importantly, if anyone is interested in trying this out, we would love to chat with you. I mean, it's certainly, I think, is designed in a way that I think the documentation would help you get started. But I'm really interested in learning more about what are the challenges, how could the APIs be better? IPS, of course, is an emerging technology, and we don't yet know. I mean, I'm fully confident it's going to change the world, frankly. I don't mean that hyperbolically. I think it's a genius standard that is going to really do good things for the international adoption of health records. But How to generate them, I think, is still an open book, and we're still figuring that out. So we would love to hear from people that have any opinions.
Cool, excellent, thank you. I'm excited to see it change the world. We have another question from the chat from Gloppin 1500. Which Smile module or Smile CDR module is doing artificial intelligence and machine learning?
Ooh, that's a fun one. So I guess I'll say this. Smile itself, our core platform, does not have any modules with AI built into them. But I've got a couple of interesting sort of things I can talk about there. I mean, first off, we've got a number of partners who are doing really cool things in the space of AI on top of Smile. I probably shouldn't get into them because I'm never really clear what people are comfortable with me sharing and what they aren't. So I will say, I mean, we've got a number of partners doing really cool things. We've got an active project going on right now that's a collaboration with the University of Waterloo here in Ontario, Canada, where a team are working on using AI to generate automatic tuning of MDM rules. This is a thing, I mean, this hasn't yet reached even experimental status where we've rolled it into the product, but it's a thing we're working on. And I'm sure this is going to feature in an upcoming webinar once we've got this sort of productionized and to a status where customers can start taking it for a spin. There's obviously a million awesome uses for AI and ML technology. And, I mean, my most important goal in the world, frankly, is for us to enable those. Even if we're not the ones running the algorithms, we're all about the data and making that data available for anything, certainly including awesome machine learning interpretations and applications. But we do have some projects going where we'll start rolling that thing in.
I keep hearing those phrases more and more as we work on different projects and opportunities and where they're going. So I'm excited for all things, but I'm excited for that one as well. We don't have any more questions currently in the chat, which means I get to take advantage of Bryn being in this meeting, which is where I just wanted to ask, what are some of the use cases for clinical reasoning that you're really excited for?
Prior auth, I know it sounds kind of mundane, but I think I'm really excited for it because I think it's going to really move the needle on adoption, and that's something that we've struggled with for quite a while. There are lots of great use cases, but actually getting that last mile of integration with the systems and full support for the specifications throughout really has been a challenge. And so I'm excited for prior auth because it will move the needle on some of those things that have been slow going. So, we've been working, for example, with opioid guidelines for a long time, and getting the pure standards-based support implemented at a site is still just a real uphill battle. And so chipping off some of the edges has been really slow going. And I'm excited to see the kind of more general industry adoption of especially CDS hooks. I think that will really change how hard that is right now. So.
Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, I remember back when CDS hooks was announced in one of these webinars, and they're like, we've made this, we're not sure what it's going to be used for yet. So when some of the prior auth stuff came along, I thought that was really interesting. And also, as somebody who's had to fax things back and forth to different offices, anything to defeat the fax machine is okay in my books. Just following up on some of your work as well, Bryn. James briefly mentioned the Android FHIR SDK with Google and WHO. Is there any extra details or elaborations you could share with us about that project?
Yeah, super excited about that. The overall, the goal is to enable streamlined digital implementation of the enormous number of guidelines that are coming out of groups like WHO, CDC. There's just a huge amount of content that's being developed. And right now, digital implementation just takes too long. It's too much effort. There's too big a gap between what the guideline says and what the application needs to do. So what we're trying to do is close that gap by providing resources that that give more computable representation, a shorter step between the guideline content being produced by the professional societies and the guideline developers, and the tools and resources you need to be able to run that and do digital implementation. So it's right now an SDK that you can use to do basic things like run CQL, and you can run quality measures, and you can, we are expanding that to support kind of the more general notions like plan, definition, apply, that a lot of the decision support is represented with. So this release has, more steps in that direction, and we are excited to start using it in more testing scenarios and really flex all of the different types of delivery activities that that you can specify in something like a clinical guideline on FHIR. So yeah, super excited about that. And if you want to come test it with us at the Connect-a-thon, let me know.
Yeah, I think we're always looking for partners who want to test out our new stuff, because we've got a lot of exciting stuff. And I'm looking forward to hearing about this as the releases go on, because that's a really exciting project. We have another question from Abdel in the chat. Can you elaborate on the benefits of audit logs being written on a database separate from the cluster manager?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the main benefit is kind of a boring benefit, but an important one. It's just plain making it easier to sort of scale your infrastructure up. The way Smile CDR works in a typical, like our out-of-the-box deployment, you've got two databases. One, which is your FHIR data, that's your clinical FHIR database, and the other, which is called the cluster manager database. And that database is used to share state across your cluster. So if you've got a big, 90 Kubernetes pods all running Smile to serve up thousands and thousands of requests a second, all of those nodes will keep their shared state in a database called the cluster manager. The cluster manager database is used for all of that shared state, but today it's also the default place where the audit trail goes, which works. I mean, it works fine. It's mostly a write-only oriented database, but it does make it hard if you want to sort of do automated snapshots or backups or recoveries or be offloading data into other places. We've had a few people say it would be really nice if we could just have one dedicated database schema that was only for auditing, just because we've got different characteristics for that than we've got for the stuff that runs the cluster. So, I mean, effectively splitting that out, it's kind of a routine thing, but I think it's important to anyone who's trying to get to big scale. That's probably the easiest way to put it.
Thank you. I think we've seen a pretty big trend this release towards like larger scale FHIR deployments, or for people moving from a smaller or medium scale up into a large scale. And this is just me asking for sneak peeks from future releases and future webinars. But is there anything else exciting coming up for people who have those needs, who are going more into the large scale?
Sure. I mean, the biggest one is absolutely the mega scale. Mega scale is, at this point, I mean, our documentation sort of shows what it can, and more importantly, what it can't do in the current release. Our aim over the next probably several releases is going to be to continue to layer functionality on, so that you can eventually do anything you in a mega scale, in a massively partitioned and segregated database that you could do in a single database. I think most interestingly, you can layer it on top of partitioning, so that you can come up with actually quite an interesting scheme where, if you want to be physically separating your own customers in separate databases, but then perhaps subdividing their data along different partition lines, along maybe the identity of the patient or something like that. Those combinations will be things that we will continue to work out with Megascale. The other big thing that we continue to work on is our batch framework. We have now finished migrating all of our batch jobs into that framework, but increasingly, I mean, now that people are sort of using this at big scale, I mean, it's starting to. We're finding little things we can improve, little ways we can make it work even faster. So a whole bunch is coming along there. Maybe the other thing worth mentioning is the EDQM product, which allows you to do measure evaluation at really, really large scale. The team have done a bunch in the last quarter. They've done a whole bunch of performance tests with really big patient populations, and their plans are to just keep on making those even bigger, just to make sure that we can evaluate measures at massive scale. I think I mean, this just kind of comes with the territory. These days, people are doing much bigger things than they traditionally have been with FHIR, and we are, of course, doing our best to keep up with everyone. I like to think we are.
Yeah, thank you. We got another question sneaking in here from Ramesh. Would the partitioning work for non-clinical data like audit logs?
Well, there's an interesting one. Our audit database today is not partitioned and doesn't have any ability to be partitioned. We have not yet had any customers ask for that, but it's interesting. I mean, that feels like a really obvious thing to need. Certainly, if somebody was building up a database where they themselves had multiple customers, where each customer had a separate partition, I could easily see wanting an audit log that would segregate those trails in the same way. I think bottom line today, that is not a thing we support, but I think that would be a reasonable thing for us to add. Probably something we should get onto our roadmap, actually.
Yeah, thank you for the question and the idea, Ramesh. We don't have any more questions in the chat. If anyone wants to sneak one in last minute, we did skip one, which was just asking where your wizard hat was. But I think personally that it's implied versus having to physically be there.
I agree.
But I do want to thank you so much for your presentation, for your answers. Bryn, it was awesome to have you as well. I always look forward to these releases. I'm glad to be a part of it myself and to have such knowledgeable folks on both FHIR and Smile here today.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 3 months. Get in touch.
In person.
Thank you.